Welcome to What Nobody Tells You. I'm your host, James Ferrigno. Join me while we explore the truths most people never hear. I'm James Ferrigno, and welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Ken Mossman. We had a good time recording this. We went really deep during this, especially towards the end, and I think you'll get a lot out of some of the wisdom that Ken has to share, and I think you'll really enjoy it. I know we did.
Yeah, and then we need to take responsibility, because responsibility really is a far-reaching, it's a much more broad, multifaceted thing than one might think from the onset. It's not just I need to do my job and, take care of these 10 things or whatever it is. It's that really connecting with yourself and with others and seeing when you've hurt someone else or when you've taken part in that, accepting it, seeing it, looking at what are their emotions around it, what's your emotions around it, is there any trauma around it for either person. Now we got to, the responsibility is working through that trauma in yourself or with them or whatever needs to be worked through. And not, you need to acknowledge it, accept it, and then take the action on whatever needs to be worked through,
Mm-hmm.
to heal it. So yeah, and it's really, in a way, for me, responsibility and compassion are almost synonymous. They're really, really close.
They're
Uh,
definitely
they're
if
really close.
yeah, they that's great. That's great, James. They are really close. They seem like at the very least some sort of blood relative, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
they're adjacent
They're
at the
yeah,
very
yeah.
least. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, because it's you really without the compassion. I will say, without the compassion piece, you can't really be responsible.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. And boy, that brings
Mhm.
I mean, that draws a neat circle back to some of what we talked about before in terms of
Yeah.
models of masculinity, models of manhood. Ideas of what, even ideas of what an adult, of what an adult is or what a grown up is, because the adolescent models themselves on what they bringing that back in the adolescent models themselves on what they think a man should be, and if what they're modeling themselves on is as we're seeing an awful lot of is a being that is um, wildly self-interested and incapable of compassion. Boy, are we
Hmm.
screwed.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot
Yeah.
of it out there right now.
Yeah, and back to what you had said before, there's a lot of adolescence, and it seems that most of the people, and this is nothing new, this has been quite a while, this has been the case, that most of the people that are steering the ship in the world are children, essentially, are adolescents, because they never really were able to take care of their inner child, and now the inner child is steering the ship.
Mhm. And
So,
you mentioned shadows before, so the denied shadows are finding their expression all over,
mm,
which we know they will.
coming out in every
They're coming out and
direction.
they're coming out in every direction.
Yeah,
Yeah, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that some of the not actually scientific concepts, but something that people will refer to as scientific concepts, have really contributed to this, to uh, people having beliefs in that. It only very recently has this started to change, like beliefs that emotions aren't real things, that someone can be too emotional, that you need to be, when you make serious decisions, even if there are emotions, you need to put those aside and not let those enter into your decision making process. Otherwise it's an emotional decision. Now this has started, there's definitely some movement here in the last few years, but still. And it's like, uh-oh, people making decisions aren't using their emotions, they're denying that they exist in some cases.
That's a oh man, yeah. We're getting into it. I think we're getting into waters that may be too deep for me and what I have read recently. But oh man,
Yeah.
yeah. So those of you who know better, feel free to reach out and say, oh, that's where that's from.
Mhm.
Because I read a piece recently, and I think it was a piece of research actually. So forgive me
Mm.
if this is not correct. Um, and don't go running around and say, "Well, Mossman said,"
Yeah.
which I know happens all the time. Goodness knows. Um,
Mhm. Yeah. All those,
um,
they're out there.
that all even the most well thought out rational decisions are in fact at their core emotional.
Hmm.
They've just got the data to back them up. And yet, which
Hmm.
I find fascinating, it's like, okay, but so there's an emotional decision, but then there's all this rational data to back up the emotional decision. It's fascinating that it just points back
Oh,
to the nature of the decision is in fact emotional, regardless of how rational one believes that they're being in making that decision. Fascinating stuff.
yeah, yeah. It really is, and that we see this a lot too. That it's a very uh, male quality for the last however many hundred years. That to try to do that, to suppress or repress your emotions and then make all your decisions rationally. And then the only possible result of that is your emotions. See, what once the emotions are out of your sight, now they're gone and they didn't disappear. Now they're doing stuff inside of you. The only difference that you've created is that now you can't see them. And so they start doing things, and now you're aware of it. So it's like suppressing your emotions is like purposely disconnecting yourself from yourself. And it's,
Mm.
in fact, a form of insanity because then this whole parts of you are doing things. And what happens, I find this hilarious, is that there's this historical thing in Western cultures, certainly, of men saying that women are being too emotional and making emotional decisions. And they, of course, do not do that. They make rational decisions. And then if you look at the decisions, if you were to compare them, the supposed rational decisions made without emotions are completely emotional. They're wildly emotional because they're made only by the emotions that are invisible to the person making them. Yeah, and then, but in order to get through the world, you've got to come up with a bunch of data to cover up that disconnection in yourself, right?
Mm.
And you can find whatever data you want, if you look for it. In fact, men are kind of raised doing that. I mean, I know I was very guilty of this growing up. I mean, I could come up with evidence and reasons for anything, you know. It's not all that hard to do, really. Um, and it kind of automatically happens if you're doing a lot of thinking and you're disconnected from your emotions. You'll think up all kinds of things to cover it up.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, so
Yeah, the emotional realm is it is nothing if not fascinating. And yeah, so there's another piece of the complex adult in there, and that is the again, not in a dogmatic way, because as soon as any of this stuff becomes dogmatic, it kind of dies on the vine. But
uh
the um an integrated adult is able to navigate their own emotions. There's an understanding that the emotions provide data. Emotions provide data. I'm angry about something, as a for
uh
instance. I'm angry about something. Now that data tells me that there is perhaps a value that's been compromised, as one example, or I'm capable of experiencing sadness. I'm capable of experiencing grief without losing. In fact, the more I allow myself to experience emotions that the culture might, in my world, just to give you an idea where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
I'm loath to label emotions as, positive or negative. Well, I'm happy. That's a positive emotion. Now I'm sad. That's a negative emotion. Well, sadness is simply sadness. Grief is simply grief. All these things being wildly complex. I mean, we don't have time to dig into the complexity of grief, but grief appropriately and deeply experienced is it's not fun. Let's not make up that I'm saying this stuff is fun. It's not fun at all, and yet it's a transformative journey. It has the potential to be a transformative journey, not Jersey, by the way. Jersey is transformative in itself, having just come from there over the weekend.
Oh,
I grew up in Jersey. It was transformative. But grief when allowed and really embraced, not as a fun thing, but as a fact. Loss is a fact. Loss is a fact. We will lose people. We will lose things. We will lose identities. We will lose friends. We will lose relationships, pets. We will lose these things. That's part of life's journey. And the more we're able to accept, embrace the grief, the more there's this weird kind of balance thing that the more we allow ourselves to experience grief, the more the door opens on the other side to experience joy. And the other way around, by the way, the other way around. Whereas if we limit ourselves to a narrow band of acceptable emotions, if we were someone who learned that big boys don't cry, big boys are never sad, big boys are never hurt, which of course is complete and utter nonsense. That's so limiting, and oftentimes that comes from a place of, hey, you know what? I'm really uncomfortable with your emotions right now. I don't know what to do with them, so I'm going to tell you that big boys don't cry, or big girls don't cry, or you're embarrassing me by expressing your emotion. I have a story which I've told on other podcasts. It was a really moving moment where my family, my son was, I think, 2.5 at the time. So we were invited to this farm, and they were doing a fall festival with pumpkins and the whole thing in Jersey. This little girl who had to be about my son's age, was dancing with a pumpkin. She was and the joy coming off this kid was palpable. Absolutely. I was like, wow, this kid is having a good time. I want more of what she's having. And I was delighting just in watching this little girl dance with a pumpkin. And her father, who I wanted to throttle, her father came over and put his hands on his daughter's shoulders, and he said, "You're being so silly, and we don't do silly. We're not silly." And I was like, why don't you just grab a stake and put it through her heart, dude? Actually, I wanted to grab a stake and put it through his heart, but it's, and goodness knows what he experienced.
Yeah.
that made that kind of a rule, but I, just to see that someone attempt to close that door, I hope that she found that little kid who's, probably in her late 20s, early 30s now. I just pray that she was able to find her way to and through that door again.
Let us hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real blow to the inner queen there, or king. Yeah. And it makes it, those blows that we get as a kid can really shut down or kill that. And then we don't know what we like anymore, and we don't know what to do with our lives because we have no idea what direction to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to handle joy when it shows up, which it will.
Yeah.
Which it will.
And I'm sure you must have seen a lot of this in your work of people who, I mean, really have no idea what to do because of this.
Who don't necessarily know, quote unquote,
Just lost.
how to feel.
Yeah. How to feel, what to do, where to go, what they like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of work, a lot of the work that I've done with, certainly in the I Am program, but also in the one-on work that I've had the privilege to do over the years with clients, with men, has been reintroducing, because we all knew this stuff as kids. We all knew this stuff as kids, innately.
Yeah.
But one of the joys is reintroducing them to the world of emotions, reintroducing them to life below the chin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even, by the way, it's fascinating, including extraordinarily gifted athletes who one would think, oh, they know how to live, and they have a lot of body awareness. They know how to live in their bodies.
You gotta be embodied.
They know how to drive their bodies. They know how to train their bodies, but they do not necessarily really know how to receive the complete picture of the body's data. That's a very, very different thing. Very, very different thing.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering with you, when you were younger, was there something that helped support you or gave you some kind of guidance or something from inside or outside that allowed you to be able to steer yourself and make your own choices?
That's a great question. I think there were a number of things. I think one of them was my parents, who were not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, recognized pretty early on that. So my dad was an chemical engineer who became an executive. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Always, she wanted to be a writer, interestingly enough. But sadly compared to herself to one of her dear friends who became a very successful writer and decided for some reason that she couldn't. But what they did really well with all of us was not insist that we become little versions of them. That we follow in their footsteps. They didn't. I don't think they suffered any illusions that they got it right and knew how to. That they got it right and had the guidebook on how to live life. I don't think there was any of that. And as a result, by the way, we were exposed to a lot of different things. There were 4 of us, I have an older sister, an older brother, and a younger sister. And, and we all took, divergent paths, shall we say, from the straight and narrow. So had they been attached to us following a specific path, first of all, they would have been deeply screwed and frustrated. But but they could they could see that we had varied interests, and that we were independent enough to follow them. So they didn't discourage any of that, which I'm really, really thankful for. I'm really, really thankful for. So there was that. I think another piece of it is the 4 of us are all very, 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 very different. And so there were no temptations, I think, or certainly by the time I came along on the third of the 4 of us, there really weren't any temptations or perhaps energy. There wasn't any energy to try and fit us neatly into molds. Again, we had the privilege of traveling. We had the privilege of being taken out. Grew up in in the shadow of New York City, so we had the privilege of trying different kinds of foods growing up that not everybody got to do. We had the privilege of going on some pretty cool vacations. Not to wild and what might be considered perhaps out there places at the time, but just the fact that we took a couple of vacations in Maine, and on the coast of Maine, this old farmhouse. Again, I remember it as if it was yesterday. It was probably, I don't know, the first time we went up there, I was probably 3 or 4 at the time, but maybe 4. But and we went up a few times. But vivid recollections of going on these really adventures and wandering around rocky, the rocky coast of Maine. And I mentioned my first undergraduate attempt was in marine science, and part of what got me interested in that wasn't just Jacques Cousteau, but it was, those childhood adventures exploring tide pools on the coast of Maine. Yeah, wandering around we vacationed a couple of times at a place that's not far from. It's not far from here in the Adirondacks, Blue Mountain Lake, which it's funny. Hadn't been to Blue Mountain Lake ever as an adult, but when a few years ago, was it 23? Maybe I'm trying to remember when the April total eclipse was. One of the places that was going to be in totality was Blue Mountain Lake, and that's where that's where my wife and my son and a friend of ours got in the car and headed up to Blue Mountain Lake. And it was the first time I'd been back in, oh God, probably 50 years. And but I remember, I have vivid recollections of wandering the trails around. Hemlock Hall was the place we stayed, which is still there. It's fascinating. It's still there. It's really cool that it's still there. But there were trails. We would walk trails and find frogs and newts and all sorts of cool critters. And the garbage was invaded by raccoons at night. And of course, what did we do? We went out there with flashlights and we watched the raccoons taking the garbage out of the garbage cans. They were these little adventures, but they were enough to, and my dad put me on skis when I was 2.5. That was another thing. So, wow. Yeah. And, it was funny because when I introduced my son to skiing after when we moved up here from Jersey, I didn't put him on skis until he was 4, and I felt terribly guilty about that. Waiting so long. I was like, oh my God, he'll never learn this. He's too old. He's blows me away now. But all those things, all of those little adventures, whether it was going to the theater, or eating different foods, or going to Maine, wandering around the forests, walking on the beaches on Long Beach Island also in New Jersey, going down the shore, and having our own adventures. All of that contributed for sure. Adventure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You bring that up. I used to do a lot of that too, and hiked trails in the Adirondacks as a kid. And I remember when I was a kid that I was 7, 8, I mean probably 8 when I first started doing this. I'd leave the house after breakfast and come back for dinner. And in between, I was in the creek, in the pond, in the woods, climbing trees, doing whatever. And I think a lot of that has some impact because you're making a lot of your own choices all day long and kind of doing something that you enjoy. Yeah.
Making choices, taking risks,
mm-hmm.
Sometimes hurting oneself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these things, slipping and falling, these things happen. I mean, obviously kids do kid things, and that's why they make Band-Aids.
Yeah. And sometimes I even bring my own Band-Aids. I didn't want to come back and bother my mom, so I could bandage myself while I was out there.
Yeah.
So exploring, I mean, I guess it's not a huge surprise that adventure and exploring and doing things for yourself and taking risks would help you get to know yourself a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever applied these with a client? Like getting them maybe to do some things like that, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oftentimes they would come up with an idea. But sure, would request, hey, go take an improv class, go
Yeah.
spend a weekend by yourself, go XYZ, and they get to say yes or no, or counteroffer, or usually better off when they come up with not necessarily better off, but sometimes more powerful when often when they come up with their own ideas of, okay, what's gonna stretch you, or oftentimes, even probably more often than not, James, I think there's a purity to the things that we discover and love as children that I think is worth taking, for most people, not all, but for most, I think it's worth taking another look at as an adult, to be able to ask or check in. Maybe it's even checking in, absolutely checking in with one's inner child. And, that thing we used to do, and that thing I used to do when I was 8 years old or 5 years old or 6 years old that I really loved. Might there be something to that? Might there be something to that, whether it's drawing or going on an adventure, or I still, to this very day, if I am presented with a tide pool, oh boy, I am a happy dude. Or seeing friends invited us to go with them to Mexico in January of 25, and this was right after I was deeply burned out at the time. It took me a while to say yes to this amazing offer that they made. They said, all you got to do is get yourself here and pay for the food. We got everything else covered. And I was such a mess that it took me a while to finally say, oh, that would be a good thing to do. But I spent literally every morning, I would just go out onto the beach and I would look for whales. And I was I could not have been, and I found them, which made me even,
Ah,
it made me even, yeah, the season, we were there at the season, it was
wow.
San Jose del Cabo. Yeah, there were humpbacks jumping everywhere, and I was just as happy as could be, just sitting around or walking and watching them every day, watching these rays jump out of the water.
Wow.
It wasn't a
Incredible.
tide pool, but yeah, I'll take a whale any day. So again, there's that adventure. And for some people, who knows, for some people who maybe perhaps haven't read fiction in a while, or have a love of history and haven't had a love of history and perhaps hadn't read history in a while. It might be things as simple as that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, they don't necessarily have to be grand adventures. But yeah, there's just so much there that we were, most of us had an interest in, or had interests in as kids, that all long-winded answer to say those things are worth taking another look at
Yeah.
as an adult. Worst case scenario, you decide, no, I'm done with that. Best case scenario, you find out, wow, I really love this.
Yeah. Yeah. I like all of that. I think the idea is not to find some perfect path that's out there, but to find in yourself what is it that you like. It's like, what do you want? And you're right. I've done the exact same thing, which is to just look at my childhood, say, well, what are the things I loved? How can I get that or part of that back in my life again, or something similar to that? And that has been a great process. Great process.
If nothing else,
Enjoyable.
your inner child will thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what are some things for maybe some of the listeners that are listening to us talking about these adventures and different things to be able to follow our path? Are there some tools that you generally give to people or advice you give them of, I mean, you just did to explore your childhood, and that's a great place to start. Is there anything else in that realm you'd like to share with people?
Let me see. Um, hmm. um, huh. There's a part of me right now that wants to, really honor that little girl that I saw being told not to be silly.
Yeah.
To say that, I think it's useful to look for places where you can perhaps express yourself differently, and whether that,
Mhm.
and in any way, whether that means walking a different way, whether, or taking a
Yeah.
different path, whether that means, you know pulling out or carrying a pen with you and making little drawings on cocktail napkins, or buying a sketchbook and just starting to doodle, or um finding a big pumpkin and dancing with it, or you know really anything, going to the dog park and seeing how many of other people's dogs you can interact with in an hour, you know
Mhm.
what whatever. I think there's something about allowing oneself to consciously step away. And this is another adult function we get to
Mhm.
take responsibility for, and that's, we get to take responsibility for having fun, with
Mhm.
harm to none. um we get to be responsible about having fun. It's like, great, if you haven't had fun in a while, go out and have yourself some fun. Nothing forced, but allow yourself to man, I think play is so underrated and so wildly important,
Uh,
because, you know everything I'm pointing toward is play. And man, that's another thing, in the conversation about men in general, is there's an awful lot of men who have forgotten how to play, or that they get to play again responsibly. And that key piece is with harm to none. But to go out and rediscover play. Go out and rediscover play. Have at
I love
it.
that. I love that. That is absolutely, and that's something I've really had to try and rediscover. I'm still on that journey. I've noticed with me, it's like there's a real, it's a challenge. It can be a challenge for me to really figure out, wait, how am I gonna play here? How am I gonna do this? And yeah, but when I can and when I do, it's amazing. So it's a
Yeah.
good reminder.
There's a way in which I think even though our mind may not be able to grasp it, or find that answer, it's like, well, how do I play? How do I play?
Yeah.
The mind may not be able to come up with an answer. Chances are good that your body will. Your body will remember one way or another.
Yeah, and sometimes you can just I've done this before, but I'm going to do it again now. Um, is to just expand your awareness like throughout your day. Just look for opportunities to play. Just set the intention that, okay, I'm not going to stress about this or make it serious, but I'll just expand my awareness and just try and you know, have the idea that I'll pay attention and look for opportunities.
They're
Yeah.
don't tell anyone, but they're everywhere. They really are. They're
They've
everywhere.
invaded.
They're everywhere. I have a funny story about that too. How much time do we have? It's not a long story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're good. We got a few minutes.
Okay. So I went to this men's retreat a number of years ago, and older guy, older than me. He was probably about the age I am now, maybe a couple of years older. So I just celebrated my 68th birthday just a few days ago. But so I was probably I was in my 40s at the time, late 40s, and we were at this men's retreat, and I noticed this guy kind of like, he avoided me, almost from the get-go. He just avoided me, and every time I looked at him, he was like looking at me like, in ways that were less than friendly. And on the last day of the retreat, and this still moves me, he approached me and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, of course." And he looked me in the eye and he said, he said, "I just want you to know that from the first moment I saw you, I have hated you." I was like, "Okay, this is going to be interesting." And I was like, "Okay," I was curious. That he decided to share this with me. And then he said, "And today, today I realized why." And he said, "It's because you have so much joy, and I forgot how to." And he said, "That's what I want." Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah. It's a huge step for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share that.
Well, of course, that's why we're here. So, just a final question. Is there anything you can leave people with, that someplace to start if they don't know what to do?
Yeah. There's a million answers to that question.
Yeah, I said it pretty generally, but in this,
Well,
in the you,
let's start with this one, and just because it's come up so often. And you mentioned also before we started recording, you mentioned you've also had other guests who um, shared about the inner child, and I think that's that's one of that's the place that's the my program, the I Am program, followed. We'll see where it goes in the future. All to TBD after my after my sabbatical. But the place that program started, because it followed a developmental path. Bringing all these different aspects of self back on board. And the first one we started with was the inner little boy, the inner child. And I would point I would point people that that's a great place to start, to get to know that part of yourself. If again, chances are really good he, she, they have not, they're not gone. You mentioned this earlier, James. They're with us always, whether they have been shut down, or the opposite, they've been repeatedly made responsible, because they're not at a developmental level where they can handle responsibility, by the way. So it's important to know, wow, am I, when it comes to conflict, do I hand the wheel off to my inner child and run as fast as I can? And that's why I can't, that's why I have such a hard time with conflict, as an example. But, get to know, if you will, get to know that inner child as in a gentle and patient way. And the reason I mention gentle and patient is because if you haven't paid that aspect of yourself any attention, if you've, as so many of us as men have been trained to do, if you've, borrowing language from Survivor, if you have voted them off your own island, by the way, they're still there, they're just pissed at you for voting them off the island. Get to know them again and begin to bring them back in consciously, and again, play is one of the best and quickest ways to go about that. But simply being curious about that aspect of yourself is a great way to begin to open the door. and if that feels like an extraordinary climb for you, if that feels like an extraordinary stretch, then I'd say, get some help. Get some help. Find some people who do that kind of work, and have at it. That's where I'd start.
All right, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there ready to provide help. So,
Yep.
Well, Ken, thank you very much. This has been fantastic.
Yeah,
It's
thanks,
a great
James.
conversation.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been lovely and very sweet conversation. I thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again.
Hi, guys. If you could like, subscribe, follow, share, that way I can help bring you more information and better podcasts in the future. Thanks.